Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sai here today to discuss with you our brand new topic for this new term and the new year we find ourselves in, which is going to be the French Revolution, specifically the cause of the revolution and the impact that it has on French society. We'll be focusing heavily on the reign of King Louis XVI, pictured in the video here. This first video is going to be the background introduction, get us up to speed on the situation in France by 1774. There's quite a lot of information to cover, but in essence, the focus is going to be on King Louis and his reign that we find ourselves in. It's also very important that we go over a revolution, what this means, what it entails, and we go into the detail of what exactly causes the revolution, the way France's political structure works, the economics they're faced with, and in the estate structure for the population. All these things we'll be more familiar with as we go through. As always, these videos have some key knowledge and information throughout, so it's very important we bear that in mind. This is for the A-level curriculum especially, but can be useful to those studying this at the GCSE level, and maybe as an introductory course for those at university level. With all that said, notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. So first off, we're going to be covering what exactly a revolution is. I think it's very important that we understand specifically what revolutions are, and of course, in the context of politics and economics and culture, that we understand the impact and purpose in society, and then how this links into France itself. Why exactly did they have a revolution in the late stages of the 18th century? And something to really consider throughout this module we're going to be covering are long and short-term causes of the revolution. Although most people will probably jump straight away to the initial, typically agreed year in historiography that the revolution began in 1789 with the storming of the Bastille. There are things that came before that that caused that, and as a historian, we can really try and trace back in the long and short term to figure out what the main causes actually are. First off, what exactly is a revolution? Well, a revolution is a massive, a very drastic change that is brought towards a nation, typically by a group of people who hold some sort of severe frustration with the rulers of the nation. Now, this can really come about from those who control the society and those who are really dissatisfied with how exactly it's structured. And this change can be brought about by those who have control in society. We tend to find a group of people, can be quite small or quite vast, will have some sort of grievance with that ruling group and want them to change something. And this is a very big precursor in many revolutions throughout history, whether it's communism for the likes of the Russians and the Chinese, or in this case, where it's about republican values and democratic values challenging a monarchy in France. For the sake of the timeline, it's worth noting a similar revolution already happened concerning the Americans when they revolted against the British rule in their own American Revolution and causing the War of Independence. Some general causes of these revolutions can be economic decline. The poor economy means life is difficult for millions in society, typically right from the poorest of the poor in the peasantry or the lower working class, right up to the richest, who, because the working class are struggling, also lose their wealth as well, and of course begin to be blamed and begin to be marginalized as the causes of the woes and worries. And it's very important to understand that this isn't just some regular decline in economy. It's not just a simple recession. This is something so deep and so dire that it would cause the masses, the millions of people in the nation, to truly rise up and cause some drastic change. There can also be dissatisfaction with the leadership. They may see the leader or the leaders as quite weak, and when looking to them to solve the problems in their society, they're unable to do that. We have ourselves in our modern society today, with democracies all over the world, an ability to change our leadership every few years. And because of that, the dissatisfaction towards a leader can be switched out. One year you may hate your leadership and switch them out, and then try someone new. And if you find they're not up to the job, you might switch back or go somewhere else. This, of course, can't happen in France. We're going to see France is a monarchy, and not just that, it's a monarchy without a constitution. So we're going to see that King Louis has a lot of power and therefore a lot of pressure to make sure things in society and France as a whole are running smoothly. We also may find that changes can be brought on by new ideas, whether political or philosophical, and they drive change forward. In our modern world today, we take many of the things in our society for granted: democracy, free elections, the right to vote, you know, especially without property or any massive signs of wealth. These are all very novel ideas in the 1700s, and things such as voting and changing leadership and having a government that isn't elected or controlled by the monarchy or some sort of royal society is very much novel, very much blasphemous as well, considering the religious beliefs of the era. And so these new ideas that come in something called the Enlightenment really revolutionized the thinking in French society. And that's what we're going to see as we go throughout our module. So it's very important that we bear that in mind as we develop our skills as a historian to understand that while we have this template of a revolution, it might not necessarily fit for the French, and there may be some more nuanced arguments we can make along the way. Now, it's very important we have some contextual background for events in France up to 1774. Those of you who have watched my French War videos will already have some knowledge of the France in this time, but so it's very important that we gather this knowledge now and really understand what exactly is the situation in France and for King Louis by the time we get to 1774. Now, long before the revolution is ever going to occur, France has been ruled by the Bourbon monarchy since the 13th century. And this era is called the Ancien Regime, or the Old Order in English. Now, French society has been split up into three very clear estates. You may have heard of the lower class, middle class, and upper class. In France, in this era, it's a bit different, a bit more complex in its structure. But generally, we can summarize the three clearest estates as the first, that's the clergy, the second, the nobility, and the third, the peasantry, or pretty much everyone else outside of the monarchy's royal circle. The third estate is the largest and primarily is filled with the peasantries, but also has serfs, urban workers, and also even the bourgeois, the educated middle class, who are trying to make a life in the city and trying to aspire for a richer living like the nobility. France as a whole is a feudal system and it's dominated by the clergy and nobility, who make up the other two estates. They're much smaller, but they hold a vast amount of wealth and rights to own the land throughout all the French nation. The peasantry are admittedly oppressed economically. They're suffering massively from taxation, and because of the feudal system, they have no real ownership of land and are very much reliant on the clergy and nobility to loan it to them in aid of their work. This serfdom type of society is made only worse by the monarchy having the French military be entirely loyal to them. Louis, of course, controls the nobility as well, and therefore controls the military. But how exactly did this even happen? How did this order become so deeply entrenched? Well, it was in somewhat of a challenge in the early 1600s, but by 1643, Louis XIV took to the throne, and he brought with him a belief in the idea of the divine right of kings. Now, it's very important to understand that religion is very, very important in French society. The majority of the people are Catholics, and the majority of them worship God very, very devoutly. Louis XIV brought in this idea of the divine right of kings. This was the belief that the monarch was the literal embodiment of God on earth, and because of that, his word was God's law. Therefore, because his word is God's law, and because the majority of the French people are devout Catholics, they therefore cannot challenge his rule. What he says is God's word, and therefore it's blasphemous and outright treasonous to dare go against it. To exemplify his supposed godliness, Louis XIV commissioned the creation of the Palace of Versailles, which is a few miles outside of Paris. And so, with this, he of course separates himself from the people to further elevate his so called godliness on the earth. By the time of his death in 1715, Louis XV takes the throne and rules with the assistance from the royal courts, who act as sycophants towards the king. So they worship, they flounder him, they flout him, and so therefore they use their influence to create laws that benefit them, the nobility and the clergy. The king uses taxes to pay for wars abroad, such as the Austrian War of Succession in the 1740s, and later against the British during the Seven Years' War from 1756 to 1763. Despite what we may say about what happened in the conflict, what did certainly happen was these wars only increased France's debt, with the king having to take on a vast amount of loans and borrowing huge sums of money so the nation could afford to even fight in the war. Because of this, the poor faced many struggles, and but the king did gain Lorraine and Corsica, key vast amounts of land for French control. He also arranged for Louis, his grandson, Louis XVI here, to marry Marie Antoinette of Austria, believing that with Austria and France united, by uniting these two monarchies, they could unite the two nations and strengthen their political and foreign power. However, France was not very industrialized throughout this time, unlike Britain, who very much was investing in industry and technology. France preferred to stay more agrarian, rely on peasantry and farmland for its work and for its people's employment. Therefore, it did not experience any sort of trading or resource boom to develop its own economy. Because of this, the mounting debt meant the third estates were now massively, massively crushed by anything such as bad weather or bad harvest. They were very vulnerable if there was any sort of deep or prolonged cold winter. And of course, if a poor harvest did hit, then it meant food like wheat, barley, the ability to make bread was practically impossible. And because of that, it would drive up the price to afford it. As such, only wealthy nobles could dare to afford it, leaving the peasantry to starve. Bad harvests, high inflation, and costly wars meant France was a poor nation when Louis XV died in 1774. So, the situation by 1774, when Louis XVI takes over, is he now inherits a nation that is massively split among the three estates, and therefore we have deep and vast inequality among them from centuries of rule during the Ancien regime. The political system is clearly much in his favor, though, because he has this divine right of kings that he's inherited all the way back from Louis XIV. However, as we're going to see, Louis is nowhere near as charismatic as his forefathers, and so because of that, when he faces challenge, he may struggle. What we're going to see, we're going to see that he struggles to maintain his authority that supposedly God has granted him. We also have a nation, as I said, vastly weakened by wars and ongoing famines, and in effect, France itself, the Ancien regime, is already somewhat collapsing and declining by the time Louis takes control. It is precisely because of these structural weaknesses in French society that the Ancien regime is undoubtedly a broken system. Because of this, we now have the precursor, we have the foundation that allows revolution to become possible. How exactly will revolution occur? What will be the main cause of it? Will it be these long-term factors, or will something short-term really come to the fore and really put pressure on France to change? And if Louis himself can't change it, will the people bring about change themselves? That's what we're going to find out throughout the rest of this module. As said, this has just been an introduction to the video to get ourselves back into our historical thinking. If you want to check out my other series, of course, which deal with more modern history, from the 1800s and beyond, feel free to check them out on my channel. Or, of course, if you want to have any questions about the French Revolution and what we're going to be exploring, do leave them down in the comments section below. I'm excited to be exploring this module with you. It is a fascinating part of history. Thank you as always for watching. This has been History with Sire. Thank you for listening.